I learned that so much of what I was doing was false. And I think I learned this. There was a reason that this came to me so clearly. I was trying to understand why people did terrible things. And I was really concentrating on the terrible, terrible things that people do. And I was interested in Auschwitz, for example, and not as a political phenomenon, but as a psychological phenomenon. I was curious about how you could be an Auschwitz guard. And I wasn't really curious about how you could be one, because, well, you could be one, of course. I was more curious about how I could be one, being such a good person as I thought I was. But I also knew that many people did many terrible things during the 20th century, and the idea that I was somehow better than them, or that I should assume a priori that I was better than them, and that I wouldn't have made the same choices or worse had I been in the same situation, was a very, very, very dangerous supposition. And that we really needed to understand why it happened, and that perhaps we could go deep enough in that understanding, which is, I think, what happens when you go deep into understanding, so that you could stop it. Because if you understand a problem, maybe you can solve it. And at least in part, I came to believe that the problem was, as Solzhenitsyn said, that the problem is that the line between good and evil runs down every human heart. And I was reading Jung at the same time, and he believed that the human soul was a tree whose roots grew all the way to hell, and believed also that in the full investigation of the shadow, which was the dark side of the human psyche, was that it was bottomless, essentially, that it was like an experience of hell. And that also struck me as true. And that the way to stop those sorts of things from happening was to stop yourself from being the sort of person who would do it, who would even start to do it. Because the other thing you learn when you learn about atrocities of that sort, for me it was a matter of understanding that the way to stop such things from happening, the way to remember properly, is to understand that you could do it, that you could do those terrible things, because the people who did them were like you. And that the way out of that is to stop being like that. And the way you stop being like that is by ceasing to tell yourself lies that you don't believe in, and that you shouldn't act out.
The only way to go from wrong to fine is not by affirmation. The way to go from wrong to fine is to figure out where the errors in judgment were by speaking the truth. Something's wrong here, finding out what's wrong, making the changes. Now it can go from wrong. Here's a good phrase: affirmation without discipline is the beginning of delusion. Now here's what else the truth does. First, it sets you free to correct old errors in judgment. Here's what else it does. Helps you to set up new, easy disciplines, to turn wrong into right, to turn lack into prosperity, to turn skepticism into faith. But in order to turn wrong into right, we must speak the truth, because only the truth will set you free. Free to correct an error in judgment. Because here's the formula for failure and here's the formula for success. Formula for failure, number one, a few errors in judgment repeated every day. We call that the formula for failure. A few errors in judgment repeated every day. Now, why would you repeat an error in judgment the second day? Reason: failure doesn't occur at the end of the first day. If it did, it would be helpful, because then you wouldn't do that anymore. But errors in judgment are so subtle because they don't usually show their results until for a while. But a few errors in judgment repeated every day, and sure enough, you're way off course. Now, here's all you got to do to turn that around. A few simple disciplines practiced every day. A few simple disciplines practiced every day starts to create success. Not at the end of the first day. The first day is the end of a new beginning. The first day. That you've started a new track. That you've started a new direction. So we must all speak the truth. So affirm the truth. Yes, affirm God is good. Yes, affirm life is full of possibilities. Yes, affirm all the truthful possibilities. But you don't need to try to trick yourself into saying something is okay when it isn't okay. Some people say every day in every way I'm getting better and better. And if that's not true, see, that we call that delusion. If it's not true, if it is true, then it's wonderful, it's fabulous, we should celebrate. But if it's not true, every day in every way I'm getting better and better, see, if that's not true, then it is an affirmation that's destructive. So just affirm the truth. The truth is I lack some skills to multiply my income by 10, which I wish to do in the future. I need to learn the skills. Affirm that you don't have the skills, so that it'll drive you to get the skills because you want to multiply your income by 10.
I wanted to get away from the whole lost civilization and these endless bloody arguments with academics and their mates in the media. I just thought, I've done that. I was interested in human origins. The background research I did focused on the issue of cave art. When did our ancestors, why did they suddenly start creating this fantastic art in these deep caverns, deep beneath the grounds, or in rock shelters high in mountains in South Africa, all over the world? And then I found there was a really good explanation for that. Let's pay tribute to the late, great Terence McKenna and his book, Food of the Gods, implicating psilocybin in the emergence of modern human consciousness. But let's also pay tribute to David Lewis Williams, who's a professor of archaeology and anthropology at the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. And David Lewis Williams, right back to the 1970s, had been arguing that the secret of rock and cave art all around the world was that it was shamanistic art, that these were shamans who had entered deeply altered states of consciousness, returned to the everyday state of consciousness, and painted their visions. And that's why there's so much in common with these images all around the world. And I suddenly realized, this is fascinating. There seems to be this moment in the human story when the light just goes on and we become recognizably us. That's what I'm going to look at. So then the next thing was, okay, I'm a hands-on researcher. I'm not just going to sit in a fucking armchair and write about this. I've got to do some serious work. And indeed, David Lewis Williams, who I have huge respect for, has done precisely that. He refuses to take any psychedelic, even though his argument is that psychedelics were responsible for cave art. He doesn't want to take one himself. He says, I don't want to burn my brains, and anyway, the research is there. I don't work that way. If I'm going to write about something, I have to experience it. Otherwise, I shouldn't be writing about it. And therefore, I needed to have psychedelic experiences. I had psychedelic experiences before, very few. I'd taken LSD in 1974 when I was 24 years old. And then I had no more psychedelics until I started to research the book that became Supernatural. I discovered that in the Amazon jungle, there are shamans who are drinking a powerful visionary brew, and what are they doing afterwards? They're painting their visions, exactly like those cave artists. I realized it was a key. I could learn from this. So I went to the Amazon, and I had my first series of ayahuasca sessions with shamans in the Amazon, and it was an extraordinary series of experiences which shook me to my core.